everyone, just a quick introduction as we get started. I'm Megan Gulliam with the Army Material Command. Thank you to Tom and AUSA for putting this together and getting all our media invited. Glad you guys could be here today. So yeah, this media roundtable, rectangle table, however we want to call it, a chance to follow up on anything you guys didn't get a chance to ask earlier today. Do ask for meeting the time that we do go one question, one follow-up, and then we'll see if we've got more time at the end. And if we just want to start down the line here with Lauren, and if you guys could just do say, oh, you know, we can actually, let's introduce our panelists first.
I'm Brigadier General Ronnie Anderson. I am the Commanding General of Joint Munitions Command of Rock Island Arsenal.
Major General Michael Lalor, Commander of the U.S. Army Tank-Automative and Armaments Cmd in Detroit, Michigan.
Heidi Hoyle, Army Chief 4.
Liz Miranda, I am the Executive Deputy to the Commanding General for Army Material Command.
And I'm Kristen French. I'm the Deputy for Logistics Operations for Defense Logistics Agency.
I'm Rich Martin. I am the Assistant Deputy G3 at Army Material Command, Executive Director for Supply Chain Management and Operations. I know, right?
We can have our titles all.
You should have recorded
this all to everybody in writing. So.
We can have first with the follow-up, Tom and I.
I'll give you my last business card.
Thank you.
All right, Lauren.
Okay, well, since we're doing this, I guess I'll start with you. You were talking earlier about how, and I'm probably going to mess this up, so please correct me, how this year you were just, I guess, able to start sending or getting the right data from DLA and industry. Can you walk me through why that's the case? Because that's
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the supply system, our supply chain is huge. The Army doesn't buy all of its own parts. In fact, 90% of our parts, mostly low dollar, high volume, expendables, things that go pretty quick, consumable type stuff, we actually rely on the Defense Logistics Agency to buy them. Many of those are actually are shared NIMs between the shared parts between us and the other services, as well as the whole of government. Use a Black Hawk helicopter as an example. The Army has the lion's share. The Navy also flies a similar aircraft. The Air Force flies a similar aircraft. The Department of Energy, the Department of Justice, they all have similar type aircraft. They buy some of their parts through Defense Logistics Agency. We have our own enterprise business system, our own resource planning system internal to the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, etc. So does DLA. And so what we recognized a little over a year ago, as we recognized that there were some of our parts that we needed, that we were, as you heard General Mohan talk about this morning, a lot of those are actually managed by DLA. And so one of the key things that we found was the things that we assumed in terms of our maintenance management system, and ultimately that feeds our supply system. We assumed that data is what went to DLA, that allowed DLA to plan for the purchasing and the procurement of those parts ahead of need. Turns out they weren't seeing that data. In fact, they weren't able to, what the data that was we were sharing, they couldn't interpret to make informed decisions on their end because they didn't connect. They didn't work the same. And so we've spent the better part of the last year getting to the point in literally, in some cases, exchanging Excel spreadsheets, and ultimately getting to the point that through a couple integration layers to a system that we call APAS, Army Material Command Predictive Analysis Suite, that we use that as a layer that lets DLA send data to APAS, us to send our data into APAS, and it connects. So it's basically we created another connection tool that lets them inject. And there's still some bugs in it, if you will, but it's definitely allowing them to see when, how much, et cetera, the depth that we're trying to get to, that ultimately lets DLA make that procurement decision. Does that make sense?
It does. So when you were, so how long were you using, I guess, plugins to have convert the data, and then also what has changed now that there is more connectivity and
Yeah, okay. Okay, so the connector, if you will, went live, I think, in December. And so things that have changed. It lets DLA recognize what we are ultimately consuming. So in other words, when, let's say I have a part on the shelf and I'm going to take that part from our stocks and I'm going to put it on a weapon system. That creates a consumption signal. DLA knows we needed to buy one, but what it ultimately was doing is it was saying I need about 5 of them once every month, and I really need 5 every week. That makes sense? So my average monthly demand is really about 20. What DLA was seeing is one input for 20 every several months, and that really wasn't giving them the opportunity. I'm oversimplifying in the sense it wasn't giving them the opportunity to then make the procurement, take that procurement and acquisition action in a timely enough to get us the parts when we needed it. What ultimately was happening is they would see, hey, I need 100. And the reality was I not only needed 100 immediately because there were weapon systems down for that part, I actually needed another 200 to replenish my stocks that was stocked out back in my warehouse. This is now letting us see some of that data that wasn't ultimately making it to DLA. And now it's a much more, when we talk about data sharing, it's just that. It's now sharing that data. And in some cases, we can see the data from DLA now that lets us know how long it's going to be before we're going to get that part. It lets us know what level of depth that they're buying that part. So there's a difference between what's able to bring a weapon system back to an operational status versus those things that are going to go back on a shelf so we have them when we need them. And that's now there's some of the things that we can start doing. And now that again, the idea, the intent is it tries to get it to them ahead of that administrative lead time and then that production lead time, which is really what's eating our shoulders.
I'm just going to add a couple of things. First of all, DLA manages 5 million national stock numbers, which is quite a bit of items that we support all the services with. We have about 100% of the consumable items we manage and about 80% of repairable items. And so a lot of items are coming through DLA for Class 9 repair parts. We do more than just Class 9 though. With the 5 million items, we do other classes like food, fuel, medical parts, etc. But what Rich is saying is we've started with DLA and Army because we found that all the services were doing forecasting separately and differently and managing their systems differently. And we needed to have a way to share the data so we could see what they were consuming and have predictive analytics, and we could look at where we need to have parts bought ahead of need. Because we tell everyone that it's a lead time away because of what we just sat with the industry and heard is they have to start up their production lines if they haven't been buying the items, and it takes them sometimes a year to 18 months in munitions, 2 years or more to get parts or items. So what we've done is the Army and DLA have set up a data sharing working group, and we have started working where we've collaboratively shared data. We started with DLA sharing data with the Army, and now the Army has been sharing data with us with this APAS system. And we have to do it through protocols because the systems are different, but we do it through API interfaces where we can talk to each other and see what they're consuming so we can predict what we will need to procure for future requirements.
Hi, Ashley Ricky with Breaking Defense. General Hoyle, I have a follow-up question and then a question for you.
Okay.
You talked about the regional sustainment framework and how the watercraft strategy, that was sort of like your piece of it. You mentioned the ship in Korea, or the vessel in Korea. What vessel was it, and sort of what are the next steps of the Army's part of this framework?
I don't have that information with me on the vessel.
That's okay.
So we'll do that as a follow-up.
That's
I'll
fine.
give that right back to you. And what was the second half?
So what happens now?
What happens now?
Yeah, with the Army's part of it.
So, expansion, I think, is the biggest piece, right? Is we've got to test no other countries. So that contract was done on actually a take-on contract.
Okay.
Okay, and so Michael Lalor has that contract. It's a multi-award task order.
Right.
And so currently on that task order is the countries of Japan, Guam, and Hawaii. Not that Hawaii is a country, but What's in the realm of possible? Do we add Australia? Do we add Vietnam? Do we add Thailand? Do we add, so that anywhere a ship pulls into port, that we can go ahead and get the maintenance that's required.
And this year we're actively renegotiating that and expanding all those different, like General Hoyle said, expanding where else we could do maintenance in that region, and then we'll do that, throughout the world, where we can open our aperture to where we can do forward projected maintenance. Previously I think we were more, we allowed, we were very much United States based, East Coast or West Coast maintenance, and now is trying to, as we're thinking this problem through, it requires new contract mechanisms, and I want to be able to have multiple options out there.
Okay. And then something a little bit different. The chief's big priority has been transformation and contact, and they've been either testing it out, whether it's at the joint training centers or even abroad, like the directed energy weapons. From like a logistics and sustainment point of view, are you doing anything with transformation and contact yet?
Absolutely.
Lay it on us, please.
We're about ready to go to transformation and contact 2.0. And so the chief is working through which specific brigades those are and then the technologies that will be utilized. So right now I know about aerial delivery. Kristen, you have the rest of the list. Let's see, because I did not bring that with me. Aerial delivery is definitely one. And as we've talked with PCC5, so this is, it used to be annual, and now it's about every 18 months being spread out with Army Futures Command and the Army is working through this process of going from sensor to shooter to sustainer, right? How can we know and understand that round was fired and then get that back all the way into the logistics systems? And so as we do that demand reduction, aerial delivery, autonomous delivery, right? Keep the soldier out of the way of the munitions or any kind of threat, and then working forward from there. I think was there?
I think the from the advanced manufacturing perspective, ma'am.
Yes,
if that's helpful.
Yeah,
like we
cool.
did. We participated this summer at JRTC, if you remember. So that we did that, and then the next one, the idea is to use other emergent technology with a unit that's transformant and let them exercise that concept. So that could be wire arc metal manufacturing instead of what we've been doing with polymers as an example. There will be things in that realm either through the project convergence type exercise or where we execute, or also some additional passing of data to a location that could potentially do advanced manufacturing, whether that might even be on a watercraft, for example.
And ma'am, do they include property accountability in TIC 2.0? Was that included?
Oh yes, yeah. So our property accountability systems, we are slow and archaic, right? When I'm a company commander, I've got a hand receipt of probably about 40 to 60 pages, depending on the type of unit. And I am seriously going by and looking at a serial number.
Visually, yeah, and manually.
Hotel Juliet 471254, right? Like if Amazon was conducting business that way, they'd be out of business, right? And so we are working through multiple different types of technologies and starting to do evaluations on them at different echelons. So Materiel Command is using specific capabilities, and I'll let Rich talk about that. We are working through some handheld terminals, scanning devices that we're getting into barcodes or so on. And I've recently talked to my deputy about an opportunity to use more of an RFID tag. Obviously each one has pros and cons. I think all of them are definitely better than a visual readout, the serial number, and make that check mark. But some of them present threats on the battlefield, right? So if you have sensors that are on a piece of equipment, is it possible that you could see and sense a brigade combat team as they move on the battlefield? I don't know, right? What's the knitting strength of a sensor that we can do? So there's some things that as we're going through this process that we are obviously looking at, are we creating a digital signature that we absolutely don't want to have happen while we're trying to solve this problem? There's certain places where absolutely let's do it right now, right? So I was just up at West Point in the cadet uniform factory. And so you could only imagine 4,800 or so long overcoats. They have to go up there after graduation, have a rank changed on them, and then they go back down to the cadet areas, right? If they get put into the wrong cadet area, you know, they don't have their name written in it. You know how it is. Anybody who's got kids and they go to school, you know, they come home with somebody else's coat. Same thing at West Point, right? But if we could put a sensor on there, that we could see this any place as it moves through the system, we don't have to do all these manual archaic processes, right? And there's not going to be a specific threat like there would be of a brigade combat team moving throughout a contested area. And so, you know, a lot more to follow, but we've admired this problem for a long time just because the sheer scale and scope. I mean, think about if we put digital footprint every piece and every item at DLA, she talks about 5 million different NSNs. That is huge scale and scope, but I think it's somewhere that we have to go, right? We've done an NSN label. It's a specific barcoded label that goes with every single part and piece that comes out of the supply system, but there's no reason that it can't be digital. Thank you. Great question.
Hi, I'm Dan Shear from Inside Defense. Rich, I know the last time we talked a little bit about how the OIB modernization plan and kind of the reprioritization that occurred after the start of the Ukraine war. I was wondering if maybe you could speak to, you know, since we don't exactly know if the U.S. will maintain the same level of commitment in terms of military aid to Ukraine under the next administration, how could we see some changes with the OIB modernization plan, and also if we don't have Ukraine supplementals going forward, how might that impact things?
So it's a great question, Dan. Yes, in short, yeah, you could see somewhat of a change in prioritization, and by that I mean when we first rolled the 15-year modernization implementation plan out, we had several installations prioritized. We actually had them all racked and stacked, if you will. And I think you heard General Mohan say it very well today. In some cases, there's the winners, and we won't say losers. We'll say not winners, right? And there were some installations that we prioritized higher simply because of the weapon systems and the things that they were being asked to do. When we rolled the plan out, we had a certain number of installations that were the most important, and that's the way that we racked and stacked the $18.5 billion worth of projects, plus those that were sitting out in a parking lot somewhere, right? When the priority shifted to ammunition production, the way that we built the plan was just that. We were able to simply change portions of the algorithm and rack and stack the prioritization schema of those particular projects. We also deliberately built a plan to where it was resource informed by all of the different types of appropriated and non-appropriated funds. And the way that we built it, if based off the resource informed, we recognize this type of money gets us this number of projects, different type of money gets another level of projects, we made a cut line. There were times where there were things that were theoretically below that cut line that would then, if we had money available, would move a butt, and you see the idea. When we received some of the those supplemental funds, we simply were able to say, we're asked, what could you do with this money? We looked at our program and our efforts in what we termed Vulcan, our database, and said, this much money of this type, right, different color, gets you this many other projects completed. So if the prioritization changes, I would tell you, I think our plan already allows for that. If the prioritization changes, we can reprioritize the schema, if you will, and re-rack and stack in accordance with the prioritizations. But I still think that we have a solid plan that even without the supplemental, you ask about without supplemental, what does that do? It keeps us on track if the regular base appropriations remain consistent. And I think that's the fundamental key that we want to stress. The way that we built the plan was, this is how we would program the money on any given year. If the programmed money resulted in true appropriations levied against it, we could execute the project. We had projects that would be racked and stacked for just in case. If additional monies were provided, we could do those things. Otherwise, they continued down in accordance to the original timeline. We had some things, in this case from an ammunition, I've got additional extra money, what can you do? We would pull some projects forward into a couple of years of execution. If the supplementals dry up, then we are back on schedule. The trick there is, as we've said at the very bottom of the OIB modernization plan, is predictable, consistent funding is critical to ensuring the success of the OIB modernization. And that's kind of an underlying theme from the rest of the panels today. The vacillation in some of the fundings, even with a change in of administration, is ultimately what makes the Department of Defense and the Army a little difficult as customers, right? But I think we have a solid plan of what's success.
Just to follow up quickly, I know you said it'll still be on schedule even without the supplemental. Now, would the base budget funding portion need to go up? And like, do you know off the top of your head, like what percentage that actually makes up in terms of the base budget?
I don't, and I don't want to quote numbers by way of percentage of the base, especially as we do get a change of administration with new Army senior leaders. We don't want to remove their maneuver space. But in terms of the base funding, if the base funding remains consistent, then the projects remain online. The other fundamental assumption in all of that is that the estimates that we have that factored into the programming request in the POM process actually bear fruit. What we're seeing across the nation in construction costs within the defense industrial base or the organic industrial base is really challenging our appropriations. We're seeing significant exponential cost growth in portions of what we're trying to do within the organic industrial base, as well as other military construction costs in different programs.
And can I just also add on there that with everything that we're seeing that's happened with natural disasters across the country, that has a second and third order effect, right? So when you think about if we're lucky enough to start rebuilding some of the homes in California, imagine the pressure on the construction supply chain, right? I think the last time I saw it was like 18,000 homes. I mean, that's 18,000 homes worth of brick, wood, wiring, HVAC, fixtures.
And that's now on top of the stuff still in North Carolina.
And still plus North Carolina, and who knows what the next thing is. And at the end of the day, reality is supply and demand. So those things, the demand for those are going to drive up prices and potentially impact timelines if they become rare in terms of availability.
Ashley, the vessel, it was the LSV-3.
LSV-3.
Which is the USAV.
USAV.
The name of that vessel is General Brehon, B-R-E-H-O-N, Somervell, S-O-M-E-R-V-E-L-L.
Thank you.
I think it is the longest named vessel in the Army inventory. An LSV, light support vessel. Apologize.
In Korea.
Korea.
Okay.
Apologize, I had to
Completed
come
in
back.
Korea and in December.
End of December, on time.
Oh, in December. It's not last
On
week.
time.
It was
It was reported last week at the
right.
commander's sit rep, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
It's only January.
it's only yes, yes.
It was like April. Thank
Right.
you.
It's all very recent. Happy New Year.
I'm Dom Menadeo, also inside defense. I'm not sure who this is best for, but something I've been following is energetics procurement, and something in the fiscal year 25 NDAA requirement from Congress is this report from the Army on energetic material procurement and how to maximize that production and how to, and also a list of materials that are procured from a source outside of the United States. So I'm wondering if someone could talk about what are some of the challenges you're facing in procuring energetic materials, what specific ones maybe are posing the biggest challenges and causing you to look outside of the U.S., and how might you go about ramping up that procurement?
Okay, So we don't specifically do procurement with any of the experts here. I know you're closest. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this in that level of detail, but if not, we'll get a connection made for sure.
That question is best suited for Major General John Rime at the JPEO-ANA.
Okay.
Joint Program Executive Office, Armaments and Ammunition. But I can give you an example, which is TNT. We talked about that earlier today, where there is no domestic production capability of TNT in the country right now. So we just got an award decision from Mr. Bush and JPEO that, and I can't remember the company that it went to, but we had an award decision that a TNT plant will be built in Kentucky.
Okay.
And that is the first, probably the second critical chemical that's being onshore. And the first was already onshore in terms of nitrocellulose, and then we have IMX, RDX, lots of other propellant and explosives, and those were at Radford and Holston. So they have the Joint Program Executive Office and ASALT have had significant investment in Radford and Holston to ramp up the production of the components that go into both propellants and explosives for 155, right? So much of the plan for ASALT for us to achieve that 100,000 rounds per month starts to come online here this year with the investments specifically in those critical chemicals and that production capability. The specifics would better be addressed by JPEO.
Okay.
Hey, I'd like to add something from the DLA standpoint. So we manage the periodic chart that you saw Dr. Randis post, that slide. We have a strategic materials office that manages a lot of strategic materials for our Department of Defense and really for our federal government. And it helps us with, and it's not always energetics, but it's things like mercury and a lot of those different periodic table chart items that we can, we need in case of, countries and national emergency. So we can get you more information on strategic materials, but we have a lot of congressional interest in it, and we have a lot of support in that program. And yeah, Joe Yazra is our senior director. But we are well aware, just like the Army is, that there's a lot of capability that's gone offshore, and therefore they have DLA manage the programs that help with some of these specialized materials. And I'm thinking, in fact, they even store some of our strategic materials at Hawthorne. And so I think that, I'm not sure if this, not all the energetics, but there is some specifics.
We just ordered several million pounds of TNT, so DLA purchased it, and now it's being managed as a strategic material in our
and some of it is not here in bonus. It's like I say, it's offshore, but we know we look for who we can get as a long-term partner. And we're well aware, of course, as OSD and IGP, as Dr. Randis' office, of where there are potentially some items that we're buying from countries that we want to transition to other more friendly countries. Okay.
Oh, hi, Ken Kraetzer with CaMMVetsMedia in New York. I'm just going to go back to comments on what's been learned from Ukraine. General Hoyle, you spoke of that today. Key takeaways and what's helping now that you have had a surge on armaments and from drones to howitzer shells that you've had to source and provide. What's been learned and learned about that process from Ukraine?
Yeah, there's been a lot of knowledge being learned. I mean, first of all is I think the delivery method. We had our counter IED fight before. Now we're in this UAS fight, and it's UAS counter UAS, and so that was kind of the structural basis of TIC, Transformation and Contact 1.0. Was the chief getting that into the hands of our soldiers? So first of all, they knew and understood how to utilize unmanned aerial systems, but then also how to do countering the unmanned aerial systems. And so that is a big piece that the Army's been working through. You may remember some recent news announcements that certain programs were caught in former unmanned aerial systems, the Shadow and the Raven programs were called. That was kind of like where the money was harvested for in order to be able to enable the procurement for these brigades that were the transformation and contact brigades. What we've also noticed too is you know, many of these technologies are being successful, but it's such a rapid turn of technology that we wouldn't be able to keep up with it if it was done in a programmatic way, the way that we do our programming for our budgets now, right? So by the time that, like today, I am halfway through building the POM for 27 through 31. I have no idea what a UAS right now will look like in 27. I mean, it is just rapidly evolving to the point that if I put a program line of a specific, you know, unmanned aerial system quadcopter and program that way, and I'm not the EE peg, so I'm not the equipping peg, but if I was the member in the equipping peg who did that, it would be inaccurate, right? And so, you know, we're looking at how can we be more agile in our programming. So first of all, we're clear and transparent with the hill, but then also how do we get the technology and capabilities that we do need for the current time. And so there's that rapid evolution is first. The next thing that would happen with that is thinking through some of the policies. Right, so as you think about unmanned aerial systems, Ashley and I were talking earlier, if an unmanned aerial system crashes in the ocean, okay, as somebody is doing training, right, they were doing it maybe out at San Diego and they accidentally crashed it in the ocean, it lost contact with the transmitter, I have to do what's called a FLIPL, financial loss investigative property. And so what that is just a document that allows us to, you know, formally take the accountability of that system away from our property and then you know, call it a loss, right? And so as we look at different systems, if we can recover them, great. If we can't, we're going to have to do things much like, you know, we haven't been able to do before. How do you say that something was unaccounted for because of a specific reason if you know, it's not coming back to you, right? You know, a majority of our equipment has always been in our, you know, in a soldier's possession, right? An aircraft, you're with it. A vehicle, you're with it. A computer, you're with it. And now that you send this, you know, unmanned system out and it doesn't come back, what's the, you know, the kind of procedural issues? We've got a $5,000 threshold that we're working through. We've got potentially sensitive communications equipment or radios that are on board that, you know, platform, or could be on board that platform. And so we're looking at it and trying to understand, right, with these new technologies, are our policies sufficient to do property accountability, to make sure that we do have a clean audit for, you know, our government, to make sure that we can properly iterate and evolve to the next technology. So that's a kind of like a holistic UAS piece, just a, you know, very simple. Then as we're doing these experiments with new equipment, we still have the old equipment in our formations, right? And so we work off of what's called an MTO, a modified table of organizational equipment. Those have periodic time frames, right? And so as you're doing experimental technologies and seeing what your brigade would need in the future, not only could that equipment pivot or change, and some of the equipment that's currently on your MTO become not relevant for the time, but also your personnel situations could change, right? You could bring in a technology that reduces the number of, for example, 88 mics are truck drivers. We might need less truck drivers because we could do an aerial delivery of a piece of, you know, equipment or so on. And so this is really evolving our formations as we're watching what's happening in the Ukraine and then kind of bringing it back into the States. Something just as simple as that could completely change a formation's equipment and could completely change a formation's structure of personnel. Michael Lalor and his team, especially, you know, in your previous, it was in your current job, the telemakmaintenance that you've been doing, right? I think that's definitely worthwhile discussing is the telemakmaintenance. I'm going to give it to him because he's, you know, the direct person who is doing it with his unit. And then, yeah, go to that next, and then I'll come back with a couple other examples.
Thank you.
Yeah, sir. I think thanks, ma'am. The telemaintenance, obviously that's something we have employed to help Ukraine from an allied perspective, because especially with the number of U.S. or allied-based systems that they've been using, being able with that geography over a distributed, distance, to be able to communicate and coach through the maintenance of those systems. So that's been obviously something you're familiar with. That's been going on for almost the entire 3 years. What we've taken out of that for our Army is, okay, we've been doing that in support of the Ukraine ally, meaning, our organization plus, other teammates within the Army. How are we going to employ that capability as an Army when, if we're asked to, in any kind of future operation? So, we've taken that on and looked at using the equipment that we have already within our formations. How can we best use that to communicate securely and communicate over distance, to coach through things like maintenance, repair forward,
Sure.
so we can keep systems in operation. And I think the other thing, which I definitely talked about earlier, but it's a product of watching the Ukraine war for the last 3 years, is advanced manufacturing, and how we're going to have to be more rapid in terms of being able to manufacture at the point of production and fill gaps. And so that was part of the genesis of creation of the battle damage repair and fabrication program, and filling unit needs quicker. And those were two outputs of that fight.
Thank you.
Man, can I add something? So, from my portfolio, the thing I would tell you is, and you kind of heard General Hoyle mention it, we're divesting of certain pieces of equipment until we're not. We're procuring new stuff until we don't. We don't have to sustain the stuff that we have until we do. Even with some of the discussions about forward repair, we can repair things and do things forward in other nations until we can't. And so the lesson learned, at least from my foxhole, the portfolio that I'm looking at, is there is the value and the importance of the organic industrial base, right? So we tend to think of this dichotomy of, well, we can do it there and then we're good. And the reality is it's not the case. The depth that we're talking about, the challenge we have is the tyranny of the distance, if you will.
Sure.
The depth is also temporal in the sense. It's taking us, it's not that we don't want to bring it back to the States, it's just in this case, it takes too long to repair it, and it takes too long to send it back out. So we in some cases have to think about being able to do both. There was, at the beginning of OF1, there was a lot of fluff given around the idea of you go with the Army that you have. And in our case, we're not doing the fighting, but we're providing stuff that we didn't think we were going to need anymore. And then we ultimately decided, actually, we're going to keep that stuff. And we've lost our supply chains to be able to sustain it. We've lost the capacity to be able to repair it, et cetera. And so there's an element of the Army reevaluating, in my opinion, its true strategic depth, not just in terms of the parts, but in terms of the capabilities and the capacities that we have to project combat power from the continental United States to a theater that we think it will be, and we will be wrong, right? Because the character of the war is changing much, much faster, I think, to General Hole's point, than we've seen in the recent past. But the nature of the war is still very much the same, and we will typically get it wrong. So the depth is what's important.
Thank you.
They say the most innovative soldier is the one closest to the fight. And as we did things in Iraq and Afghanistan, we had this luxury of building up this iron mountain of supplies. That is not necessarily available inside of the Ukraine. So we are seeing things that they are doing with battle damage repair that we always had written in policy that we had authorities to do in times of need, but we never really needed to utilize that from a holistic perspective of executing missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, because we had that sheer volume. We had consistent funding from overseas contingency operation funds. We had, everything, it was like this perfect OR, operating room kind of working versus a clinic, that's, and I'm not trying to compare haves and have-nots here. We're just talking about the battle damage repair and assessment. was underutilized as a capability, and it is something we are going to have to do in the future. We are changing how our echelons of fighting, right? In Iraq and Afghanistan, we were utilizing units of action as a company or a task force. We are moving up to the division level. We are pulling complexity up into the division level. And so you're going to see significant changes in your Army as a result of the capabilities and technologies and the fight that's going on. 777s, right? So it's a howitzer, right? And so there's a gun tube on a 777. I mean, the number of rounds, 155 rounds that have gone out of those tubes is just something we would not even probably see across the entire Army in decades of firing operations. And I'm not a field artilleryman, but the number of rounds that they placed downrange and the number of tubes that had to be replaced back in CONUS, and I'll defer to you again to kind of speak of that, is just something we had never seen and probably will never see, just based on the type of fight that they have, right? We've got different capabilities that they don't have, and so it's a artillery barrage going back and forth in different aspects, and now we're adding missiles and so on. But Mike, if you want to maybe talk about what it did to impact the industrial base.
Yeah, I would say that use of that howitzer in the volume it's been used definitely confirmed the accuracy, the precision of that system, and also its endurance, that it could fire, and those tubes had longer life than originally expected. In exponentially beyond what was initially expected. So then, in terms of production, because you're firing at that rate, it drives a requirement for additional cannon tubes at a rate we haven't seen in generations, which has then driven us to produce cannon tubes in our organic industrial base or our water-related arsenal, which is part of TACOM, at a rate we haven't produced in, I would say, at least 34, 35 years. And so it's also forced us to reevaluate our processes as we modernize and stride, and then also what we can be going forward in terms of producing, because cannon technology is going to just continue to evolve at a higher and faster rate.
Is the 777 American made?
Yes.
So can I add a DLA comment? You want to follow up first?
I just wanted to ask about water fleet and any lessons learned, what is sort of the capacity that production facility is at right now, and potentially expanding past that? I know that's a sensitive topic.
I would say that how I would say it, Ashley, is that the production we've been able to generate out of there in support of this war has we have, I would say, over 3-year span, I would say we're probably triple the production we were at the beginning. So what it's given us is an ability to understand that we have much more potential to produce at scale inside Waterville. And so what I've asked the commanders in my organization, and particularly with Waterville, I continually ask them is, what can we be next? So I would just tell you the last 3 months that we've had more production per month the last 3 months than we've had in 40 years. So I can tell you, and I'll just leave it at that. I think that's how much we were able to produce, if that's helpful. Meaning the last 3 months have been the highest volume each month that we've been able to do in a 40-year span. So now where else can we go? I think we can produce more. I also think it suggests that inside the Army and industrial base, we're definitely looking at it, that secondary sources are going to be helpful too in a future conflict that we may have to fight.
So if we went outside of the organic industrial base, how many other people could, if they were given the technical data, produce the tubes?
Well, I would say right now there's at least several others. How many, if given we had to expand at a much larger rate, you could share that technical data, we could have multiple other producers. Absolutely. The question would be how long it would take for us to make sure that they ramped up, and then we validated their processes. And I think, like anything else that we've done over time, initially that might be, I think we would go faster and faster and faster, is what I would say. I'd be hard pressed to give you a number how long it would take to ramp, but I would say anywhere from, probably you could get to multiple producers, I don't know, certainly 12 to 18 months, say that, and that's if you're moving fast. Because it's a unique capabilities, right? But like anything else in exigence, I believe you can produce at a scale and rate faster.
So adequate production right now at Waterville,
Yes.
but potentially you could scale with multiple producers if they had the technical data and the
Yeah, in a large scale conflict, if that's what in the environment we're thinking about, yes.
The last one I would say is interchangeable and interoperable. So as we work with allies and partners, we consistently had this conversation of being interoperable. NATO STANEGS, which is a standard that is applied across NATO, was the way we worked before, and now interchangeable is the kind of discussion point. They want to have the capability, instead of having a 152 or 155, right, that we have the ability to use each other's ammunition, that we could do maintenance with the same sets of tools, that we could do communications on the same network, that we could do. And so there's, I think, an increased energy within Europe and NATO, and having sat inside of the facilities in Poland, conducting observations at the Security Assistance Group Ukraine. It is amazing the contributions of the countries that are within Europe. It's just, you walk in there and, it's not just a U.S. patch on every shoulder. I mean, it is. You've got Canadians and Australians and the French and the German. I mean, there is, every country there are committed to the same fight. This is not just a U.S.-Ukraine thing, which, kind of takes a big piece in the United States media, but there is so much behind a multifaceted effort overseas. And it's important and critically exciting to watch the camaraderie that's happening and the desire for interchangeable. And they love U.S. equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the reliability, the durability,
right, that's exactly what I was saying about the M777 that succeeded even what we said it was capable of, and I think that has created a further demand for our equipment worldwide. No doubt, because of the reliability, like you said, ma'am, and everything that goes with it.
Great work by industry.
Sorry. 2 quick points for DLA side. First of all, when Russia invaded Ukraine, about 40,000 American troops were sent over to Europe. And that increased the requirements for food, for fuel, for repair parts, and medical supplies, everything. And we have this, General Singleton talked earlier about our ability to be less efficient and more resilient, and have the ability to take our contracts and our capabilities and surge them as requirements increase. We thought that might be a short-term conflict. It's now almost 3 years, and so that those contracts have matured now, and we understand it's a different situation though than Iraq and Afghanistan, because obviously you're dealing with multiple nations and all the rules we have with our contracts in DLA over in Europe. The second thing was what Rich said, and I would follow on with that we store and we manage our parts based on demands. And the Army had given us more of an indication they were going to divest some equipment, so we don't buy ahead of need if we believe that the Army is no longer going to be buying parts from us. So M777s, MRAPs, other pieces of equipment that we did not foreshadow we would need spares for. So what happens is that all of these have been now pushed over to the Army's sites forward for them to prepare them to then do presidential directives to Ukraine. And the parts are not on the shelves. Army doesn't have the parts, and DLA doesn't have the parts. So what do we have to do? We have to go to vendors. Vendors have stopped buying some of them, producing some of those parts because of the requirements were not there. So that's this do loop of having to keep ahead of need and realize what General Hoyle said, that legacy parts don't mean that they're going to be gone next week. I mean, it could be a long time to vest. And so we were able to ramp up production, find vendors, work issues, and we still have back orders. And that's a constant conversation we have with Army Material Command, and we're working that exchange, what we talked about earlier, so we know what is getting to a balance on their shelves, so we can be ahead of the game and potentially procuring ahead of need. But it's this constant communication that has to happen between the services and DLA because of the requirements that we know. We have parts from B-52s from the 1960s because they still are flying them.
Yeah.
And so it's this understanding of what the services are needing for longer term potential use and not divesting. And we have those conversations all the time.
I don't want to get into like the whole mechanics of a working capital fund, but those who know, like,
It's
right, you don't buy if you don't sell.
You're not gonna sell.
Okay? If you're not buying, you're not ordering, right? Or if you're not training, you're not buying, you're not ordering, right? And so, leading up to the Ukrainian fight, we were coming out of COVID, right? And so training was at lower frequency. The Army was still training. We were still conducting our deployment requirements, but the volume of training was less, which meant demands were less, which, we used some of our strategic depth as we were in COVID because of just the sheer turnover of that volume of equipment. So I think we've recovered
A lot of
from
lessons
the
learned.
COVID era.
It's a long answer.
It does for certain commodities, and therefore there's some small businesses that went out of business. And another little fact from DLA is we lost about 26% of our suppliers over the last 4 to 5 years. And a lot of it is because of either COVID or mergers and acquisitions, or the companies were mom and pops and they just didn't keep up. They didn't have the clientele. Skills, that's what we talked about, having people who aren't skilled in different products. So there's a lot of reasons. And so because of that, the defense production have certain commodities in certain sectors of the industrial base, but not all. So that's a discussion we have regularly with a lot of associations, because they come and meet us regularly. They come and meet with the Army. I know the Army has a lot of conversations at AUSA and other forums where they talk about how we can get the different companies to stay in the game.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.